Today's topic is Kashmir poetic traditions. This is the first Kashmir festival which is organized by Global Kashmiri Diaspora in collaboration with I Am Buddha. We are talking about the tradition of Kashmir's poetry from last 5,000 years and more. We have seen phases, probably predominantly. One was the Sanskrit, when Sanskrit and Pali was the main language of literature of poetic compositions. In Sanskrit, most of the composition in the prose, all the compositions are in poetic form, whether it is history or it's mystic poetry or spirituality or any other subject. So our tradition of Sanskrit from Nilamath Purana to Rai Tarangni, to Shaivist philosophy, and to other poetic forms. We have 70% of the literature available in Sanskrit is from Kashmir. And I don't see there's exhaustive. There's only a tip in the iceberg. What must have been lost, we don't know. But whatever is there is a stream of consciousness. With the stream of kings is a stream of consciousness of ethos, which is traveling throughout the 5,000 years and more. From, I will just say, it's from Kalhana to Vimal, Satish, who's also on our panel, and further down, number of young poets writing in various languages, Kashmiri, Hindi, now English also has become a dominant language. From poetic traditions of Sanskrit, we have a second phase. The first phase will be taken care of Dr. Advaitavadini Kaul. She's a scholar on this subject and needs no introduction. And after 19th century, Dr. Satish Vimal will enlighten us on this subject of all the poetic forms. We are not confining ourselves to Kashmirians only, but all the poets, because now the writers are, Vimal himself is writing in various languages, Hindi, English, Kashmiri. So after Laldet is a connection, a connectivity. She transforms the earlier ethos to a new era, which became the era of Kashmiri poetry, and those were turbulent times. The darkness has descended on the political scene. But the ethos did not die. After some time, Nundarish came with a tradition. Nundarish, Laldet said, Asiya is Asiya also. Nundarish also gave a form to those turbulent times by saying, Putrom Kartal Drone, Gurum Drone. Or his one saying, which is equal to his all poetry, is Anposhteli, one portion. You have to see how they were. Even Laldet did not appeal to the mystic poetry only. She appealed to common people. Sari Saman, Aksira Islamahan. She talked of the political scenes also. Hachu Hurju Petu Pangum, Abakshan Pyom Yatras Dini. And after this transformed into mystic poetry of Sufi, which is called Rishimat, Sufi's poetry. We have a stream of Sufis, Sufi writers, mystic writers. But the consciousness is same. Language may have changed from Sanskrit to Kashmiri, but the consciousness is changed. We have in Sanskrit Kalidas from Kashmir, born in Kashmir, who's very prominent. And then we have in Lal Ded and Nunrish, and then we have Persian poets, Ghani Kashmiri, and this Ghani Kashmiri, and a stream of number of writers, poets, who came on the scene. Even Momin Khan Momin, तुम मेरे पास होते हो गोया कोई और दूसरा नहीं होता. He has a Kashmiri origin. Urdu. Then Iqbal. Again, Asair Khudi. There is consciousness. It's a stream of consciousness going on. And then thereafter we came to 20th century. We started from Mahjur, Abdullah Azad, Rasul, Nadim, and up to this Rahi. And there are many. They are just illustrative, they are not exhaustive. They are just illustrative people of the tradition, which is going on. We cannot, in a small time, we cannot save anybody, and give a great list. We have now new generation poets who write in Hindi, English, Kashmiri. There's a void in Kashmiri Pandit poets of younger generation now. For the last 30 years, we don't have any young generation. The youngest is 50s. There is no other, because of the migration. Now we have a new class of poets which came for is the English poetry. Whether it is Dr. K.L. Chaudhary, his laments of a migrant standing in a queue for some kgs of rice. Then there is a Aga Shahid searching a post office in an alien land. And there are others who are writing now in English, in Urdu, in Kashmiri. In Kashmiri, we have got women poets, right from Lal Ded, Arnimal, Haba Khatun, now Nasim Shafai, Nighat Sahiba, Sunita, and in Hindi, there are not many writing, but Dimple Kaul, Sunaina Kachru, and Surbi Sapru, who are promising poets in Hindi. The tradition is same. It has not changed. So I give it to Dr. Advaitavadini to throw the light on this Sanskrit period.
Thank you, Narinder ji. So I'll be speaking about the earliest period, literature of the earliest period of Kashmir. Sanskrit literature is replete with unique intellectual traditions contributed by Kashmir, right from ancient period. But unfortunately, as we all know, much has got lost due to various reasons. But whatever is left, along with stray references or the traces of references and prevailing practices or the documents available outside India, that reflects upon the very rich tradition of the past. If we take, for instance, the Vedic period or the Vedic sources produced from Kashmir, we know that the Logakshi Grehe Sutras, according to which we perform our ritual practices, etc., belong to the Kathaka branch of the Krishna Yajurveda. And then the only Atharvaveda Samhita that is available to us today has originated from Kashmir. This is the gigantic Sharada manuscript of the Paiplad Samhita, treasured in the University of Tübingen in Germany. In Europe, the study of the Sharada script was started from this manuscript only. Since this panel is on poetic traditions, some points require clarification before I start talking on the main subject. First of all, we must know that Sanskrit literature produced in Kashmir, unequaled in richness, variety, and continuity. From 2nd millennium BCE or possibly earlier to the 18th century CE, it has produced a wealth of literature, sacred and profane, philosophic and scientific, poetic and juristic. Sanskrit makes no difference between works in the metrical or form and works without the factor of meters, so far as poetry is concerned. Both are called poetry if they are poetry on account of their artistic beauty in form. Kashmir has greatly contributed to the development of Indian literature. It has produced the famous propounders of the Sanskrit literary schools or literary traditions, which is known as Sanskrit Kavya Shastra. Vamana, the founder of the Riti school in 8th century CE, his Kavyalankar Sutra is considered the first at evolving the philosophy of literary aesthetics. Udbata talks of different theories of Riti. There follows a line of Kavya Shastra teachers like Rudrata, Kayata, Ruyaka, Mahimabhata, Anandavardhana, Mammata, and Abhinavgupta. Anandavardhana founded the Dwani theory and Mammata the Rasa theory. Abhinavgupta propounded the Rasa Dwani is the soul of poetry. Due to the time constraint, we take a cursory look on the traditional literature produced from Kashmir by dividing it in different subheadings. Like I take first the Purana literature or Purana Kavya. In this, we have 3 works available to us. Many works have been lost, but what is available to us are only 3 works. And the first is the Nilamath Purana. This is the ancient historical source. It is basically a regional Upapurana, reflecting upon the culture and practices in ancient Kashmir. It records the story of the origin of Kashmir from a big lake known as Satisar and how the Rishi Kashyapa developed it as a place for dwelling. It is also prescribed. It also prescribes the observance of rituals and festivals around the year. What is interesting to note is that many rituals and festivals prescribed in this text are still practiced by the Kashmiri Hindus. Then we have second Purana known as Vishnu Dharmotar Purana. It is an encyclopedic work in which materials have been culled from the Upanishads, Mahabharata, Natya Shastra, various Smriti Granthas, etc. It deals with various topics on different sciences and arts. It is a huge text. It has gained it had gained its recognition by the 7th, 8th century CE. Then we have Vasuki Purana. It is a small composition of 500 verses, and it provides the description of various religious places between Bhadrava in Jammu region and up to the Mount Mani Mahesh in Chamba, Himachal Pradesh. It is a pilgrimage route, and the pilgrimage still takes place in the month of around August every year. Then we have the stream of Mahakavyas. In this stream, we have 2 very important works. There are many works. Some are even unidentified, but we are taking note of very significant works which have also gained the attention of scholars. So we have two very important works available with us belonging to the Buddhist Kavya literature of Kashmir. The first is Shiva Swamin's Kafinabhidaya Kavya. It deals with the Buddhist legend of King Kafinna, well known in the Buddhist literature in general. It is very well known in Buddhist Pali literature as well as in Sanskrit literature. The author dedicates his work to Shiva because he was not a Bodha, but such is the high spirit of scholars. Even if they were not the followers of they did not follow the faith, but their literary or their intellect was so high, they wrote on those subjects and they took interest in these subjects. Then this work is highly admired as a Mahakavya by the Sanskrit scholars all over. The second work is the Avadana Kalpalata of Kshemendra of 10th century. The poet has drawn upon the traditional Avadanas in his work in poetical form. Avadanas earlier used to be written in prose form, but he wrote it in poetical form. It consists of 108 Avadanas. The last one was added by his son Somendra because the author did not live to complete his work. Somendra also wrote introduction to his father's work. The other Mahakavyas written in Sanskrit, which were produced from Kashmir, are Ravanarjuniya of Bhattabhuma, 7th century. Then Haravijaya of Rajanak Ratnakara, Kadambari Kathasara written by Abhinand, the son of Jayant Bhatta, the well-known author of Nyaya Manjari. And another work is Shrikantha Charitra of Mankha. This is a Shaiva Mahakavya written around 12th century. Katha Kautuka Mahakavya of Srivara is the translation of Yusuf Zulaikhan, originally written in Persian. Next important genre of the Kashmiri Kavya is known as Manjari Kavya, which means the abridged Kavya, abridged poetry. Kshemendra has written three Manjari Kavyas known as Bharata Manjari on Mahabharata, Ramayana Manjari on Ramayana, and Brihat Katha Manjari. Brihat Katha was the work of Gunadya, which is now lost but is preserved in its abridged form written by Kshemendra. In historical Kavyas, we have Kalhan's Rajtarangini, covering from earlier period to the 12th century. Then we have Jonaraja's Rajtarangini from 12th to 15th century. Srivara wrote Zaina Rajtarangini covering from 1459 to 1483. Pragyabhatta has written Rajavali Pataka covering from 1513 CE, but it remains unpublished. After that, we have Shuka's Rajatarangini covering 1513 to 1538 CE. Kashmir had a very important tradition of storytelling. So we have Katha Saritsagar. This was written by Somadeva, the court poet of King Ananta of Kashmir. It is the Sanskrit version of the stories culled from the large work of Gunadya's Brihat Katha, originally written in Paishatji Bhasha. Then we come to the devotional Kavya produced from Kashmir. This occupies the very high position, and this Kavya has occupied the attention of many scholars at present. Many works have come out from India and abroad, and I know many scholars who are right now working on the devotional Kavya produced from Kashmir. It is very significant to note that the intellectuals of Kashmir were also great devotees of very high order. It is basically through these devotional poems that the tradition has survived till date. Who among Kashmiris Hindus is not aware of the Shiva Stotravali of Utpaladeva, Bhairav Stotra of Abhinav Gupta, and the Panchastavi or Gauri Stuti, which are part of each and every ritual observance, big or small. And many devotees recite the verses from these stotras even every day. It is worthwhile to note that the poets of Kashmir showed their excellency in the field of poetry. The beauty and grandeur of the poetry composed there was recognized by the scholars and also common readers. The poetical creation of Kashmirian scholars covers a wide variety or diversity of themes. It was a general belief that Kashmir, being the abode of the goddess of learning, was the most suitable place for composing a unique and beautiful poetry. Bilhana claims that because the poetry and saffron are like brothers, they therefore lived together only in Kashmir and not elsewhere. He writes, Sahodara kum kesaranam bhavanti nunam kavita vilasa na sharada desham apasya drishtas tesham yadanyatra maya praroha. According to the well-known anecdote, Sri Harsha, a celebrated poet of the Naishad Charita, a well-known Sanskrit kavya, had to go to Kashmir to get recognition of his poem. After a great deal of trial, the goddess of learning had bestowed recognition on his kavya. Sri Harsha himself gratefully acknowledges in his poetry the recognition that was granted to his kavya by the Kashmiri scholars. It is also gratifying to note that the kings of Kashmir gave a considerable patronage to the growth of poetry and other literature in Kashmir from time to time. The great kings like Lalitaditya, Avantivarman, and Jayapida were lovers of Sanskrit poetry and particularly with the other types of literature in general. Again, we remember Bilhana, who says that even the women of Kashmir were well versed in Sanskrit language and the majority of people could speak Sanskrit fluently. Sanskrit remained the official language of Kashmir even during the reign of the early sultans, that is up to the end of the 14th century CE. The political history of Kashmir attracted the local historians and chronologists like Kalhana and Jona Raja in 11th century. They have recorded faithfully the account of the political developments in Kashmir. Had these scholars not done this great service to the nation, much historical data would have been lost forever, as it happened in the case of other aspects of cultural heritage of Kashmir. Whatever out of the whole substantial contribution of Kashmir and her scholars has survived, the onslaughts of the time needs to be protected very carefully before it also perishes forever. We require to unearth the still hidden treasures of antiquity of the cultural heritage of Kashmir. It is our primary duty to pay attention, to bring to light more and more records of Sanskrit learning lying in Kashmir in whatever form it may be. We have to be vigilant to save them. Now is the need of the time to do a thorough research of all the manuscripts, whichever are still in the ignored condition, and get them published and do research on them. I want to point out here that nowadays we have many people learning Sharda script. But my point is that they should know why they are learning Sharda. It is not that we are not going to introduce Sharda and people will start writing in Sharda. Our purpose of learning Sharda should be to be able to read and those and research, do research on those manuscripts, the wealth of knowledge which is hidden in the Sharada manuscripts. That should, I want to reiterate on this point, that it is not, because there is a wave right now going on that Sharda, we have to learn Sharda, we have to learn, but we have to have the scholars. It is not for all to learn. We have to find the right people who have some background. There is no harm in if people, out of reverence, they may learn Sharda. They may, and I have also noted that many people, they don't know what is the difference between script and language. They must know Sharda is a script. It is a mode of writing. It is not the language. Languages can be Sanskrit or English. Like a Roman is a script, and in that way, Devanagari or Sharda is a script. And also that I want to know that I concluded at the devotional literature of Kashmir, because it is the idea, intellectual, we had the very intellectuals of very high order in Kashmir, but they were at the same time devotees. They were vigilant to their surroundings, what was happening around them, and they took cognizance of them and wanted to give some education to the common people. So we see that after, say, up to 18th century, we do find works written in Sanskrit. But later on, as you also point out, that the mode of writing, it shifted from Sanskrit to Kashmiri, and our earlier Kashmiri, it is mixed Sanskrit and Kashmiri. Then we find there must be many other scholars or mystics whose works are lost to us, but the Laleshwari is the shining star amongst them. So she is the light pole. She is the light who sheds light on the past and also in the future. So, but her ideas, I'm working on her works right now, and I find we say that she had Buddhist, but she was totally engrossed in yoga, and she's in the cover of, she's expressing her ideas in the in local form, like we say that she was Kahan Gav, but she says it, Kahan is the Indriyas or senses. She is, but it has double meaning. There are so many verses which we can, common people can say that it is, she says that Garigasa, she wants to be one with Shiva, but for us common people, we have lost Kashmir, we are correlating it with that.
Namaskar to all of you. It's very difficult to analyze people who are my contemporaries. I have to speak on the poets of my age, but it's very easy to count them and have a look over what's being written around me of my age. I would speak after Ahadsagar's era in poetry, as I have been ordered. First of all, as I heard Dr. Advaitavadini Kaul, it was very enlightening. I feel when she was speaking, I was thinking that when I'm going to talk about the contemporary poets or the modern poets in Kashmiri, or from Kashmir, writing in many other languages other than Kashmiri, have we completely disconnected from the age of which she was speaking? Or have we carried out something which we continue in different forms or in different ways? Have we lost that idiom? Have we lost that knowledge, background of centuries? So, two, three different things are here. First of all, when we go back to the earlier century of earlier modern poets, we see a dramatic change from the earlier consciousness being expressed through poetry and what they started saying. It was a complete disconnect. And when I look back to that period, I find progressive movement very much responsible for that, because they were instrumental in giving us many good things also, maybe, as people say. But as we are talking about poetry as an art, they destroyed it, decimated it completely. This is not about particular about Kashmir only. This is particular about India. So the modern artist was completely convinced, mobilized to write something that is different from their age old tradition of knowledge and understanding of life. That's quite evident when we start reading Nadim Sahab or Rahi Sahab or Kamil Sahab in his earlier days. Nadim was a great poet. He balanced things, but many of them, his contemporaries who were part of that movement, when we read them now, we feel that poetry is nowhere. The feel of poetry is nowhere. There are two, three people only. From that era, it was a big band from Asi, from Nandlal, and many others. I have the kalam of them with me also. But it's Rahi, it's Nadim Sahab, it's Kamil. Partly some of the poems from them are worth mentioning, but otherwise they are not even mentioned in the history of Kashmiri literature now anyway. Because the ideology was infused into poetry so much that it killed the basic spirit of poetry. But later on, when we came to some poets like uh, Motilal Saki, Arjan Deo Majboor, or a group of that period, they revisited their past again. Uh, and the lead was taken by Saki Sahab. He is now ignored everywhere. Whenever we talk about Kashmiri poetry, Saki is not even referred to. It was a very uh, sad thing about Saki. Advaitavadini was talking about the poetry on different subjects. His poetry is on historical subjects. His poetry is on the mythological themes. So he has not only written on the contemporary subjects purely, he has mixed things from my history, from my mythological traditions, from my faith into the poetry. But I don't know why everywhere within Kashmir and out of Kashmir, when Kashmiri poetry is uh, analyzed, Saki Sahab is being kept aside. I don't know why. He's a major poet in Kashmiri language. So is Arjan Dev Majboor. So they are lesser talked about poets in the modern context. I don't know why. But they are, to me, very, very prominent poets. As equal as we find Ghulam Nabi Firaq or uh, Rahi Sahab or Kamil Sahab. One more thing is that lyrics of the poetry has empowered the poetic expression in Kashmiri. I mean to say, it has become much mechanical with the introduction of the ghazal form in Kashmiri language. Earlier, when Vatsun was there, we found a variety in the poetic expression of Kashmir. That Vatsun included the traditional forms, many traditional forms which we inherit from Sanskrit, we inherited from Persian. But Ghazal was purely an Arabic mechanized way of poetic expression. And 99% of the Kashmiri poetry written within the last 50 years has been written in Ghazal form. That has very much hurt Kashmiri language as such on a bigger note when we analyze poetry. It now looks we are doing some mechanical job, and when we read that poetry, we don't feel the ananda of reading a poetry. That's the biggest problem Ghazal has given to Kashmiri language. Again, we see the Sufi poetry tradition is being still practiced by some poets in Kashmiri, but now it has diluted. Many Sufi poets around, many books being published on a regular scale, but the merit of that has completely come down because different ideologies that have creeped into Kashmir have hurt that Sufi Rishi tradition of thought very much, and that has destroyed the basic spirit of Sufi poetry. Now it's more the religious poetry being presented to us in the name of Sufi poetry. But one good thing is there that new poets who are writing in Kashmiri or in Urdu or Hindi, as Safaya Sahab named some of them, they are a hope. So they are trying to revive things. I know many of the young poets from the Muslim community in Kashmir who are revisiting Lal Ded and then writing poems with modern sensibility, who are revisiting the past with historical consciousness. The situation in Kashmir for the last 30 or 32 years has also influenced Kashmiri poetry too much. In the name of poetry of resistance, in the name of poetry of dissent, politics has entered into the poetic expression, and that has also hurt it very badly. That's equally bad for Kashmiri poetry as was the progressive movement. But I'm hopeful that the modern people are lifting it, and they are hope to all of us. The poetry written in Urdu or Hindi or English, more poets are coming out. In the earlier years of the militancy and some 10 years back, we find all poetry the replica or the copy of the sentiment or poetic expression of Aga Shahid Ali. That was more a political discourse or a journalistic way of telling things than the poet's way of telling things. But now the people have come out of it. It's a long spell of situation around here in Kashmir, and things are improving. We see new poets, 4 or 5 of them have come out with the anthologies also. They are a hope. They are writing very good poetry. Visthapan Sahitya is very important of the period. Very, very important, still to be analyzed. Because that is the only connect of a big community which was driven out of Kashmir with the tradition of Kashmir that was dissipated. So that's very important. And many masterpieces out of that have yet to be analyzed at the national or international level. Because to our bad luck, Indian writers or Indian art historians have not written satisfactorily on the Vistapan Sahitya, which is very important. Thank you.
Dr. Vimal, you said after 19, the three forms resistance, Vistapan, and there was sorrow also, weeping, which is there's more of a
Yes,
weeping than of a poetic
absolutely.
form.
So
Yes,
Rahman Rahi used to
that
call
is,
it Rahman Rahi used to
we
call it Rudali Sahitya.
as far as this exiles, poetry in exile, the whole world is witnessing it, whether it's Kurds, whether it's other places. There's some good poetry being written by Yazdis who have to leave their land,
Absolutely.
by Kurd people of that period. They were writing again, who have left their land, had to leave because of violence.
Right.
This poem, people are like black poetry, Dalit poetry,
But
which did.
that's much talked about on the platforms throughout the world,
Yes,
throughout the country also. But when we go to literary festivals or the debates or the seminars at national level, we hardly see anybody other than a Kashmiri speaking about the Vistayat Sahitya. They are allergic to it because that doesn't suit the progressive movement narratives.
Some people are in a denial mode. That's the problem. If you then the things become political. Otherwise, sensitivities are lost. When politics creeps in, the sensitivities are lost.
That
The
has
point.
crept in. That has crept in. Uh, Safaya sahab, you will possibly agree with me that Indian political system is completely having a unit in the literary field also, and that's
That's
much stronger than anybody else.
yes, yes.
They have a lobby. They have a
What
lobby. You will be projected if you go with that ideology.
uh, but what I think that our Kashmiri tradition of all forms, which you have said from past to Sanskrit era to passing through the Rishi materials and all that, that is a world class poetry.
That's world class, absolutely so.
World class. Maybe
That's why we are worried that we have been disconnected from that.
a long time back, I read an African poem just in a magazine. I didn't know. I thought it's somebody has translated all that. Then I said, somewhere
Absolutely.
somebody
I
thought is universal thought.
Hmm.
Universal is there, which connects with the whole world.
Hmm.
You
That poem.
just referred to Aga Shahid Ali representing Kashmir. I also read that book. Maybe I have a defective understanding of poetry, maybe. But uh, I'll request you, please go again and revisit that book again. And then tell me, where do you find the poetry which is uh, which has the power to celebrate, to be celebrated?
Yes, yes. That's what I said. He
That's
tried
just the journalist's narrative of Kashmir
to.
from a viewpoint, and that viewpoint has been projected out of
Yes, yes. That has been projected on a bigger stage.
bigger stage.
Uh,
That may be that he writes so well. He writes so well, but he doesn't write poetry so well. He that you can call that anything else.
Everyone cannot
that is
write
why
poetry.
the
But
way
the lobby has tagged him as the
Here.
best poet of English literature of the age from Kashmir or from India.
That is why I said he was looking for a post office in that alien country.
That's a simple journalist's viewpoint. He couldn't use that metaphor in the poetic form. Advaitavadini ji was just referring to Lalted's work ki gar gatha. It has more than one or two or three meanings and connotations. The poet
You
has,
can understand it at different levels.
yes, absolutely so.
Unchronicled pain. A country without a post office you lament? Do a people rendered homeless not move you? A community killed, maimed, persecuted, uprooted? When will you chronicle that in human torment? A country without a post office you lament? Why do you forget that it is our sacred land? Souls of our ancestors still wander in the ruins where yours foisted their crescent. A country without a post office you lament? You travel the world, return to a warm home while we had to choose, convert, die or flee? Collect our shattered lives, build ourselves all over again in the suffocating corners of a tattered tent. So, when a country without a post office you lament, do enlighten how is my pain intolerance and your violence dissent?